Hello and welcome to Amati Insights call. As you know, we do this every 2 weeks, and the purpose of this is to put together our thoughts on something which we consider investment relevant, reflects how we're thinking about our portfolio, and is based on some of the research we've done recently. Of course, and you will see a disclaimer on the screen, this is not a recommendation to buy any stocks that we may or may not mention, and the fund itself, of course. So do your own research and seek financial advice where necessary. With that, our subject today is logistics automation, which is a recurring theme for us. We call this Roberts don't call in sick, and they don't. It's becoming more and more relevant. But the reason we brought it up today is because we've just been to a trade show which we visit regularly, one of the Europe's largest logistics and automation shows here in the UK. And it will be interesting to start with how does this year compare to previous visits?
Yeah, it was definitely had a more of a kind of back to business feel about it. It was very well attended. Historically, because as you say, we go every year. The last couple of years, it's been quite easy to talk to people on stands. They've been sort of had long periods where they're not too busy, but that was definitely not the case this time. I had to be more judicious with my timing to speak during quieter moments. So there seemed to be a bit more activity, which is good. And just some of the sort of main trends that sort of stood out. Definitely the whole ASRS, the automated storage and retrieval systems. These are these big cube storage systems. Customers looking to just to improve on their existing infrastructure, make them more dense, more reliable, more high throughput. And a lot of that's being done through software. Obviously, some improvements to the equipment, but a lot of it's optimization software. The other area was AMRs, so these automated mobile robots that you see wandering around warehouses carrying boxes and racks and things like that. And that's kind of the first step to going to automation in a warehouse. You sort of bring things to your existing staff, and they do the sorting and picking off the robot. And it's great because you can flex them up and down. You can take more on when you're busy and get rid of them when you're not busy. But it is becoming a bit of a commodity, so it's definitely worth talking about that. And maybe the other point was that there's very limited differentiation now in that part of the hardware. So we're seeing some early stage kind of startup companies even giving away the product to reference customers just to sort of get into the market. So the value seems to be increasingly moving to the software.
Yeah, software is eating that world as well. Now, it's been a trend for a while, logistics automation. This acronyms that you're mentioning, we've talked about them before. Why is it still interesting? What's the kind of growth runway we're looking at going forward?
Yeah, well, it's still surprisingly underpenetrated. So I listened to a talk by one of the big sort of logistics consultants in the industry, and they were saying that still it's only 2 to 3% of warehouses globally that use high throughput systems, these kind of big cube or automated systems, and only around 20% are using any form of automation. So there's still a long way to go. We sort of sometimes we feel it's a bit of a mature market, but I spoke to actually a company that we own on the fund, Reply. It's a consultancy business. They have a warehouse management consultant part of the company. And those guys are always at the shows. It's always useful to talk to them. But they said, despite the fact that their market, that warehouse management software, is sort of seen as being mature, they still grew 35% last year. So it is interesting. It's still a lot to go for. And growing it, we think it'll grow high single digit to sort of into low double digit, given that we've had a couple of years of slower growth. So still very early, we think, in the rollout. And obviously it makes sense because the costs of labor are rising. So companies are being forced more into doing automation, particularly in the UK, where we've seen big increase in the cost of labor. And also things like AI and data optimization. A lot of that is meaning that the return on investment for this for this sort of spending, this equipment, is going up and up all the time. So and it's not just about predictive maintenance. It's also about demand optimization, throughput, and just efficiency of the whole warehouse. And the last kind of point on this, in terms of where things are going, we're increasingly seeing the bigger companies using digital twins. So this is something we've talked about on Insights before for other industries. But these big logistics networks are using digital twins as well. So they can run simulations on, flexing up and down volumes, for example. So let's say you're a retailer and you have a period of sunny weather suddenly, and demand for garden furniture goes up, or barbecue food, or whatever it is, and they can pre-plan these things using the digital twins.
Yeah, I mean, digital twins have been a recurring theme across industrial end markets. We obviously have talked about industrial software as a space we really like. All these companies, whether they are digitizing, major infrastructure projects, the roads and bridges, or buildings, or industrial equipment, there's always a digital twin at the end of that value journey. Once something's built and installed, it also exists in the cloud in the form of digital twin. Just picking up this demand for the demand drivers for ASRS, this kind of cubic storage. Obviously, we have a portfolio holding an AutoStore, which is one of the leading vendors in that space. How are they doing? Were they at the event? What are the kind of competitive dynamics in the space?
Yeah, they were very prevalent, not directly because they go to market through resellers, but there were a number of AutoStore resellers there, so they had a big presence. And that system, that business seems to go from strength to strength. So they're getting bigger and bigger structures now that they can build and optimize it as the software improves, and they can improve the kind of robot route planning. And it was interesting talking to one of the consultancy companies. They said that it's really, the step change has been almost like going from the old days of GPS in your car to being GPS now with real-time traffic data. So it will reroute on the fly, and means that the throughput and optimization of these systems is really improving. And so they see, again, the software as a real competitive advantage. And the company continues to do very well. They're seen as being the leader in terms of reliability. So they have 99.7% uptime still, which is best in class. They're definitely seen as the premier solution. I discovered that Asda is a customer. I didn't realize that Asda was an AutoStore customer. But they're obviously not the only player in this area. There are a number of other companies that were present at the show who are offering different types of cube storage. There's a company called Exotech, which is not a listed company, but has some really interesting shuttle robots that go up into the cube storage, but also run around the warehouse. So an interesting solution that is good for some applications. AutoStore's closest competitor, if you like, is Ocado. And they were saying that they're seeing some of their retail customers looking to create dark retail stores. So these are where you don't bump into the people who are doing picking for online shopping. They have dedicated stores for online shop picking, and they are starting to use more Ocado systems in those units. So it's a really innovative business, and there's a lot going on that's changing in the whole cube storage.
Yeah. I mean, the big headwind to the whole industry has been the macro environment, not something usually we make a lot of judgments on, but we had this COVID overhang. A lot of capacity was built, and it took time to grow into this. Then we had just very unsettled global economy. You never knew where you want to build that warehouse or that factory, given the tariff uncertainty and the interest rates, which are key decision-making factor for large capex projects. Remained high for a while. So how's that? How are your companies kind of tackling that challenge? And their clients. What's their sentiment like?
Yeah, I think the sentiment was generally more positive. It really stood out that a number of people I spoke to talked about pent-up demand from exactly what you're talking about, this kind of period of a bit of a hiatus in spending. And one of the companies was actually quite specific and said they see 2026 to 2028 as a kind of boom period where we recover from the slowdown. And they're seeing that from kind of early talks with customers. Hopefully this doesn't get now upset by the issues in the Middle East, but with that aside, they're definitely seeing an improvement. But you're right, they're seen as a big capital outlay. Companies can be a bit reluctant to invest so much up front because the technology changes very quickly. And so one of the things that I really noticed this year that I haven't seen so much in the past was the way that the financing in the industry is changing. So there are a lot more companies that are offering this equipment as a kind of as a service almost. So a bit like leasing. So when a customer acquires it, they just pay for an annual subscription fee almost to access to the hardware. And there are independent companies that are offering that financing. I met a company called CHG Group that I'd not come across before, who kind of act as a middleman, and they're seeing a lot more demand for this. But also some of the resellers of AutoStore, like Element Logic, I spoke to, they said that they're starting to increasingly offer this on their own balance sheet, which is really interesting. So, labor is this really important pinch point, and companies are looking at flexible ways of getting access to this automation without having a massive upfront bill.
Yeah, I mean, there are many sectors where moving from upfront kind of license sale, if you like, or equipment sale to a managed service has been not only a demand unlock, but also a valuation rating improvement. This will become more predictable, more recurring businesses if this does go ahead, assuming of course they price it well, which we're hoping they will. I mean, the other area that we talked about before is RFID, and logistics obviously is a very important end market for them. What's the latest on their RFID front? What are the companies saying?
Yeah, I mean, again, definitely continues to grow as a solution, and it makes a lot of sense. You can check individual items coming into and out of a warehouse very simply, so you have incredible stock control. They're using increasingly fixed readers around conveyor belt systems, so there's no additional work. Nobody has to stand there with a reader. It just gets integrated into the product flow. Yeah, I mean, there's a high return on investment on that, because companies can take out a lot of the excess inventory in the warehouse that they sort of needed, those buffer stocks in the past, because they weren't totally sure what was in and what was out. So it continues to grow, and there's a lot of excitement around RFID.
Yeah, it's a classic scenario for us of something that's technologically inevitable, but it's occasionally obscured by inventory cycle or demand cycle, which is transitory. So it's something we continue to dig into and have positions in, well, primarily in Pinch, which is the main technology provider in the space. Of course, this wasn't just a logistics show; it was kind of a broader industrial automation show. Any other kind of headlines in the last few minutes that we have left on, what are the interesting trends outside of just logistics automation?
Yeah, there were a few. I mean, I think just to sort of cherry pick a couple, you probably heard of this term Industry 5.0. We had Industry 4.0, and it's now obviously moved forward. I spoke for quite a long time with a company called Rexroth, who produce these Linux-based controllers, which are a bit like virtual PLCs that we've talked about again in the past. That sort of
kind of industrial computers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this effectively means that you can put these sort of inexpensive but very smart Linux computers into the workflow in your factory, and then effectively they act like a bit like virtual sort of like electronic Lego. So the companies that you put them in, you don't need an engineer anymore to interface them. It can be done by any individual without any coding experience, so they're low code or no code interface. Typically, you just download an app from the supplier's app store, so you can integrate then a CNC machine or an HVAC system or cameras or robotics or whatever you like. You download effectively like the driver from the app store, and your whole system becomes a very simple to run network, and that's now becoming much more the case. And we heard it actually from Analog Devices at the big data show earlier in the year, the same kind of thing happening. So it makes robotics much simpler to integrate and much quicker. And the last one that was really interesting was AI. Obviously, there's obviously AI talked about everywhere, and agents. But I had a conversation with a managed services IT service company called 24, and they are seeing they're using AI agents with their customers, and they're finding that their customers really like them, and they're generating a very high throughput for sort of external and even internal customer queries. A lot of cases, people don't even know they're chatting to an AI. And the interesting thing was, they said they survey people and they get very positive feedback. But last month for this company, internally, their AI agent won the Best Employee of the Month award, and that was voted for by internally by the teams. And it makes sense. It means they're freed up from doing the boring calls to doing the more interesting ones and kind of more retraining and things. So anyway, it's definitely having an impact now in IT services.
Yeah, I mean, one of our big debates, which where we see real divergence between what the market is saying through how these companies are priced and what the companies and the industry is saying, is the role of IT services in this AI integration. The market's basically assuming that IT services industry is going to be disintermediated, disenfranchised, maybe just destroyed by AI, which kind of replaces a lot of value that this companies currently provide. Whereas what we're seeing is the complexity of real industrial use of AI is such that they need more IT services rather than less, those industrial customers, to make AI work for them. Maybe it's transitory. We think it's not, but it's definitely it's a cautious position for us. There's only so much swimming against the tide you can do in the well balanced portfolio, but we certainly are taking that view. Well, fantastic. I'm very envious. This sounds like a really exciting trip, and I'm sure we'll as we process these findings, we'll find more interesting stuff to discuss, and we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with more ideas for you. Thank you very much for your attention.